who are with us for the first time, welcome. It's absolutely lovely to have you with us. Now, Calvin Seerveld, the Canadian aesthetician that some of you know, he reminded us at a conference that I organized in Canada that a renewal of Christianity will never come just by academic work. Personally, I think the best academic work is an indispensable ingredient, but Seerveld would say you need a riot of song, poetry, literature, new children's authors, music, etc., etc. In other words, a renewal will not come out of individualistic scholarship, but out of a community. And so about 13, 14 years ago, Hans Rookmaker's daughter, Marlene Hengelaar Rookmaker, who sent her apologies for not being with us today, started a website that is one of the very prominent ones on Christianity and the arts, called artway.eu. And then about a year or two ago, she asked if we would take it over. Just a tremendous gift. The Dutch face of artway.eu has been declared UNESCO material. So that gives you some idea. And so I applied for funding, and we got a good grant from the Abraham Kuyper Christian Leadership Fund towards starting our arts project, partially employing our arts project manager, Otto Bam, is the person we appointed, and redoing the whole website, which will be done by the end of June, both the English side and the Dutch side. And Otto has now taken over that, and that has now come under the whole English side of Artway as part of the Kirby Lang Center. And now, Father, continue with us by your Spirit and excite us about this great gift that you've given us. For Jesus' sake. Amen.
We have a great celebration of the arts in store for us today. We will do some thinking, and we will hear fascinating talks. But at the heart of this afternoon is a celebration of the launch of a book, of the legacy of a great website that lives on and has an important role to play in the world today. And we will also celebrate the gift of music and of the arts. So just to give you an idea of what to expect, I'm going to offer a few introductory comments, after which violaist Rachel Yonan will bless us with a performance on the viola. After that, Fr Dominic White will speak about his own practice in music. And at that point, it would already have been enough. That's wonderful already, but the feast continues. We will hear a lecture by Dr. Roger Henderson, co-editor and contributor to the Artistic Sphere, which is the publication that we celebrate together today. This will be followed by a Q&A and a panel discussion featuring Murray White, Roger Henderson, Fr Dominic White, and hopefully Henk Reitsema from Libri, although he's been delayed, so he's making his way over here as we speak. We will then have a short break to stretch our legs. And lastly, if Henk is here on time, which I believe he will be, we will hear a little bit about the history of Artway, after which I will present some of the work that we've done on the website, give you a glimpse of what the website looks like now, and just talk a little bit about the vision that we have for the future of Artway. Now, there is nothing more public than the arts, one could say. The only thing as public as the arts maybe is religion itself. Public in the sense of being universal to humankind. Indeed, the phrase original sin has enjoyed long and prominent history in the Reformed tradition. Original blessedness has come as a reminder that before the fall, the creation was called good. It was blessed. And that so blessing precedes judgment in the sacred history of humanity. But I want to introduce now the idea of original participation. Yesterday, and probably someone else has coined that phrase, I might be late to the party. But yesterday in her wonderful talk, which was dotted with beautiful performances on the viola, and if you've missed that, it's just because you didn't sign up to the arts track as you should have. Rachel Yonan showed us the incredible relation between the very substantive material world of which we are part and how it works, and the meaning and mystery that we experience in art and in music. Before we have the faculties to explain, to draw complicated graphs illustrating the way that music reaches us through sound waves, even in our infancy, we participate in the world. We participate in music. We know how to respond. We know how to speak this very complicated language that one can spend your whole life trying to explain in abstraction. It's our native language. And it turns out that the world is full of music. The mystery that we who think about the arts try to uncover is that we seem to understand from birth a language that all creation speaks, but which is not easily translated into the language of category. It is the sheer mystery of the fact that we have understood something when we have heard music, something fundamental, of original importance that drives us to give account for it. But lurking on the other end of this pursuit of explanation, of giving account for the plenitude we experience in art, of the meaning, there lies the very real danger of disenchantment. The danger of explaining the magic away. It is remembering, on the other side of our inquiry and explaining, that creation is a gift which brings us back to the place where it all began, wonder. Hans Urs von Balthasar penned what I see as a rallying call for those who think about aesthetics from a Christian perspective, reminding us that this wonderment was the beginning of philosophy. It was the spark. We who know that creation is a gift, we who believe in the loving creator of all things, who called what he created good and shared our humanity in his own creation, it is we who are the custodians of wonderment, which von Balthasar argues is the very source and preservation of philosophy itself. Eucharist, we know, means thanksgiving, and thanksgiving is the bedrock of Christian worship. So we must keep kindling the light of wonder, of thanksgiving, and carry it to our work in the arts and public theology. And now, as a step towards that kindling, I want to welcome Rachel Yonan, who has graciously offered to perform for us this afternoon. Rachel is a visiting scholar from Duke University here at Jesus College in Cambridge. And she has a special love for chamber music. So we welcome you, Rachel. Thank you.
I thought I would share with you today one of Bach's cello suites. He wrote 6 of these. I will be playing the third one, which is in C major. And it's a very bright, joyful, and exuberant piece with a almost improvised prelude followed by 6 dance movements.
Thank you, Rachel. That was marvelous. Incredible. Thank you. I would now like to invite Fr Dominic White to speak to us about his own practice in music.
It's hard to know what to say after that, really. Beautiful, Rachel. And I think it just brings out what you said earlier about this beautiful intuition of music as the sort of the original language of creation. There's always a tradition to sing the scriptures in reciting them. There's something else. So, on the Feast of the Archangels 7 years ago, I was leaving the Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art in Newcastle after seeing some fairly average art, really, and suddenly some words came to me out of nowhere. The work of Christian artists is to show others what we have seen and heard in heaven. So reflecting on these words that came to me, I thought of the visionary of 2 Corinthians 12, who, Paul tells us, was taken up to the third heaven or paradise, where, literally translating, he or she heard unspoken words that it is not possible for a human being to utter. Sounds a bit like music, doesn't it? Some things cannot be said, which is why we need art in all its media, as it goes beyond ordinary words. Many composers, from Tchaikovsky to James Macmillan, have had the sense of hearing a heavenly music, which they must write down, as the angel said to John, "Write this." And in writing down the music, they find a freedom in playing with this inspiration, even as it drives them. And this helped me understand what I do as a composer, performer, choir director, and poet. So John's vision, of course, in Revelation was not, or Paul, or whoever it was taken up, is not a pretty escape to pie in the sky, but a vision deeper into reality. We see the liturgy, we see war, cosmic upheaval, and the successes and the failures of the churches. Deep archetypal realities, the tabernacle, the woman clothed with the sun, the new heaven and the new earth, the real utopia, which we long for. In water and spirit, Jesus explained to Nicodemus, you need to be born from above. So we, when we were baptized, were born from heaven. So our own inspirations, images and visions, even our challenges, become art if we accept the Spirit's process of inspiring, guiding and purifying us. That means that sometimes what we show will be uncomfortable, but it will always be hopeful. And for a generation that doesn't want a saviour, title of the Berlin Biennale a few years ago is "We Don't Need No Saviour," a quote from the Nina Simone's song. Well, let's not argue with these people. If they can't hear the word God, let's show them what Jesus' salvation looks, sounds, and feels like. And I wonder if this is why God is raising up more artists in the churches right now. And I'm very excited at Kirby Lang's commitment to the arts and to the fact that Christ is already playing in 10,000 places. And I'm most grateful to be invited today as a poet, composer and performer. And I'd say Dominicans are people who hand down to others what they have contemplated. But I find when I'm writing music or poetry, I cannot distinguish between contemplation and action. It's the one place in my life that really comes together. So what do I do as a creative? I'm a church organist, and a lot of what I do is accompanying hymns and chants and solos, improvisation. Something comes to me, and I have to improvise. I have to play with what I've heard in heaven. Some of these improvisations have turned into compositions. I discovered last year when I did the Catholic Charismatic Called and Gifted course that creativity is my charism, as in 1 Peter 4:10, my special gift. So it's what God has given me, not just for myself, but for the sake of the church and the world. Sometimes gave a concert last year with Father Robert, who's a wonderful trumpeter, who's the prior at Blackfriars. When I compose, I say that I write down the heavenly music I've heard. I do not want to pretend, and this will be outrageous, that I write devoid of all earthly musical influences, and that somehow my music is the heavenly music. But almost all the music that's influenced me has had some spiritual sense, a sense that these people have heard, and they are my teachers. 20th century French organ music, great committed Christians, holy people like Olivier Messiaen, Maurice de Rufflet, Jean Alain. Debussy's La Mer, when I heard it, their great work on the sea, I thought, this is not about the sea, it's about what the sea is. It's a work of metaphysics. My school gave me almost daily contact with the English choral tradition, everything from the Eton choir book through Tallis and Bird, Gibbons, up to Vaughan Williams, Finzi and Howells, and now great people like Jonathan Dove, whose music I'm very fond of. The holy minimalists, John Tavener, Arvo Pärt. Eastern Christian music, very cosmic, really is creation's language, whether Armenian, Russian, or Greek and Arab traditions. Also, I do like a bit the Beatles and prog rock. If you ever heard Watcher from the Sky, there's something very cosmic about that music. I'm also inspired as a theologian, sort of putting that creativity together, my theological work, with the Pythagorean theories of music, which was so influential on Christian theologians, not just because I think they were Platonists, but because I think there was a resonance. They thought, yeah, somehow Pythagoras was graced to hear what we heard. Hence Augustine on the musica mundana, the music of the spheres. Cosmic music is not just emotion, it's not just all about me, it's something bigger. So I'd like now to offer you a little introit I wrote for the Feast of the Ascension, Men of Galilee. My theological research on early Christian cosmology also fed into this. St. Irenaeus has this, what he calls a tradition of the presbyters, the disciples of the first apostles, that there are 9 heavens. So Paul talks about a third. And actually that big chord there into heaven is a 9-part chord, sort of superimposed thirds. I'll come back to dance in a minute and something I think that we need to do. How long have I got? I think I've been going for about 5 minutes. If rotten vegetables come my way, I'll know you've had enough. I also work a bit on poetry. It's something I never thought I'd do, but it happened. But I'm working on a collection at the moment called Angel Works, which is about my spiritual encounters in the atheistic city of Berlin. Historic city, arty city. Dominicans there are very involved in cultural dialogue. We go to the Biennale together. It's a city of a lot of transgenerational trauma, needs healing. I mean, whether it was the Second World War, the Wall, the less-known trauma, some of the ancestors, some of my friends there, of the East European Germans who were expelled, Poland, Czech, further east, as a result of Nazism. Still dealing with all that. And yet the angels seem to ambush me and others everywhere. And yet I know a lot of the artists are drawing in very dark places. They play with magic, some of them. It's very clear. So this poem is called Farewell at Tegel. I was invited one evening to the Carmelite monastery near the former Tegel airport, which is now sort of the urban tech republic. And the Carmel was set up there quite deliberately because it's where conscientious objectors were executed in the former prison during the Second World War. And Edith Stein, of course, Jewish philosopher, Catholic theologian, Carmelite nun, martyr, Holocaust victim, great thinker. So this is in memory of her. Between the executions, the airport and urban tech republic, the philosopher's day, a surprise invitation. Every even summer, in galleries, disconnected shops, and the Stasi's house, I come chasing fragments of what angels know, some real as stone and soaring light, and brighter than graffiti, others burnt dark and twisted from their fall. When will you dare to crawl out from under sorrow? You'd still be alive, you know. Let me share a secret. In morning lakes, I cool my FOMO to infinity, enter the words given deeply to be said, washed ready to receive. So to Tegel this green evening, now hearing concrete colours and remembrance. They laughed, offered strangers ice cream, berries and white wine, as Edith might have done before the dark, among friends, sisters, brothers. She said she'd never laughed so much in all her life. Happy, and happy I was for them, to slip away now quietly, as she liked to do, the summer dust between my toes. So music ministry, I first met the Dominicans through being organist and choir director of our London church. And I always, which I'm now ironically the prior, I always sensed that music was a ministry, hence cathedrals have lay clerks, lay clerics. Now, that might be very clericalist, but you can see there was an understanding there of ministry. So during my time here, when I was assigned to Blackfriars in Cambridge, I felt God calling me out of the amateur choir where I sang just for relaxation, but I got frustrated by the secular context of sacred music. We worried far more about what we were wearing than how we were singing it, what it was for, you know. And I felt called to refound the festal choir at Blackfriars, which had fallen into abeyance in COVID, which was, I felt what God was asking me to do was to combine the ministry of music, which our evangelical brothers and sisters have so well recovered, and to combine this with the English choral tradition, like the collegiate churches, like Clare College, which sang the piece you heard just now. And our choir is mixed ability, but again, people seem to be touched and lifted up in the sound. We always pray before we rehearse and before we sing in the liturgies. 15 years ago, I wrote the music for and produced a multimedia dance work called Cosmos. I never meant to do this, it just happened, which was about recovering the cosmological dimension of liturgy, again, going back a bit to what you were saying, the universal language, the new heaven and the new earth in Revelation, to reconnect with the spiritual but not religious people of our time, who you probably find yourself. They find their spirituality in nature and the cosmos, but not in God or in church. I started by writing organ pieces based on Gregorian chants and ended up, as I say, directing a multimedia dance work. I had terrible trouble. After all, it's about words that cannot be said. I had terrible trouble explaining this to other people, including potential funders, such as the Arts Council, just what Cosmos was. The only thing I can say is that inspiration got hold of me, drove me, delighted me, and wouldn't let me go. After 12 years of work, we did a full performance. And this was also the starting point for some new theology, my book, The Lost Knowledge of Christ, Contemporary Spiritualities, Christian Cosmology, and the Arts, which came out with Liturgical Press in 2015. I'd like to show a little video excerpt now of one of the pieces, which is called The Mystery of Time. It draws partly on that lovely Christmas hymn of the Father's heart begotten. Of the Father's heart begotten. It's a piece about creation, the fall, the incarnation, Advent is preparing the second coming, the light in the darkness of John 1, the new heaven and the new earth. So here's a little clip of it, and it's performed here by dancers from the London School of Contemporary Dance at the French Church in London. So I'm neither a cultural pessimist seeking pastiche as if the spirit was only given in the past, in some mythical golden age, nor am I seeking trying to be original. James Macmillan just writes a piece of music down till it's right. I try to do the same. I'm interested in writing down what I hear, well, simply what is coming to me. Then it's finished. And I hope that if the music has inspired me to write it down, then somebody might be cycling by where it's being rehearsed somewhere, even if they don't come to the concert, and they may be taken up. That's my hope and prayer. I'd like to finish by just reflecting what I think the churches need to do. Now, I found it incredibly difficult to get my artwork out there, I'll tell you honestly. I am in conversation with a professor at York University about putting that poem and some others into a pamphlet. The performance at Clare College was thanks to our novice last year, Brother George, who was the former organ scholar at Clare. In spite of encouragement from Sir James Macmillan to send my music to cathedrals and everywhere else, no answer. The arts world, including the church arts world, is basically a closed shop, is incredibly competitive. It's the opposite of the church. Now, we believe that God has given each person a charism, a special gift. So when somebody comes into our church, as you know, what we should do is say, oh, God is discerning, God has given that person a charism for hospitality or administration or pastoring or creativity. And we work with them to bring that out. And I really ask that that's what we do, please. Because it is senseless when God gives people gifts that we then don't make use of them. So I'm thrilled to hear about the big new launch for Artway, for example. And, if you're interested in hearing more of my stuff, I'd love to share it with you some other time. But I think that might be our prayer, that as God has gathered us today, he will also raise up men and women to put out there, particularly the creative works of all artists in our time. Thank you very much.
It was wonderful seeing dancing with music. At least in my background, we see so little dancing in the church. So it's wonderful to see that, and also thank you for that very perceptive, identification of what we need to focus on in the church with regards to the art. I now want to invite Dr. Roger Henderson to come and talk to us about the artistic sphere, and I think you will introduce your topic in more detail to us. So thank you so much.
If you have a copy of this book in a bag, maybe you'd want to pull it out. If you've already read it, you don't have to. This book was born in a little committee, well, actually maybe in the back of my head somewhere too, but in a little committee in the Netherlands which publishes Reformed, Reformational, Christian philosophical works. And they hadn't ever done anything in the area of aesthetics, and I knew there were a lot of the great people who were in this book who were working on it, including one who's here today, Adriana Dingerink-Chaplin. And so we thought, well, that'd be a really good idea. Let's see if we can collect articles from each of those writers and put them together. And we did that successfully, wonderfully, thankfully. And the book came out in Dutch as, if you know any Dutch or you know a little German, Kunst deel volente. Kunst as maybe we would hope God would like it, something like that. The first chapters of this book are about Calvin. And so they basically give us a sort of basic grounding in his thought and how that related to the arts. The very last chapter of the book, by a lady named Virginia, you can see it if you have it, she writes about the way in which, since the 1970s, Christian institutions and people and places pretty much all over the world, but maybe mostly in the West, have started theology and arts programs. And so a lot of students can go to universities or seminaries, et cetera, and be engaged in the relationship or how Christian thought should come out into the arts. In between, there are a lot of other very interesting articles. I have to say, some of it's a little rough going. I mean, you have to think. That's always hard. And certainly the articles by Hans Rockmacher, very, very challenging articles or an article by Calvin Serbild. He's a Canadian, maybe a lot of you might know him, but particularly his stress on imagination and his belief that human beings are almost basically imaginative creatures. And the way that comes out is quite amazing. It's a hard article to get through, but it's worth the effort. And really that's true for most of the rest of the book. There are also 4 art historians, of course the first being Hans Rockmacher, who've also written articles. And fascinating when you hear about the way art history by one of the articles actually came into existence and how that discipline was formed. It's an amazing article just in terms of how a discipline can come about what sort of things happen to guide and direct it. That's a fascinating article. And there's another one in the back by, I think it's Johnny Walford, I may be mixing up names, who writes about beauty. And beauty is a kind of controversial thing among a lot of aestheticians or art historians these days. He actually makes sort of an argument that you actually can't get rid of it, that somehow it's always going to be a major factor in art. Anyway, all of these articles I think are worth your while, but indeed it's a lot of work to get through it. But I do recommend the book, and I think it's absolutely wonderful that you were given a copy. So if you don't read it yourself, give it to somebody who will. How to be an artist or actor. How can we be artists or actors? These are possible because we are all actors. We are all performers. We all pretend to be this or that. And we are imaginative beings. I do agree with Servelt on that very much. We are actors with agency. And because we have agency, Proverbs tells us, keep your heart, for out of the heart comes all of the issues of life. Keep your heart. But we are our hearts. So who is this that is supposed to do the keeping, and who is it that is kept? Scripture says, do not be double-minded. And Paul often writes about self-deception or being self-deceptive. How can we be both the perpetrator and the victim? However, since I have a left hand, I can use it to harm my right hand. This allows me to act or appear as double or even multiple. We are all actors, we're all pretenders. Different impulses drive us. But we are one-hearted being, even though we can function almost effortlessly as two or more. Although I have a root as a hearted being, a root can draw on very different sources, on different soils, on different ground, on different forces. How do we get ourselves to feed on the right source? And I will give you a hint how I'm going to end, and that is by listening to conscience and Scripture. Art, including music, is inherently very public, as we heard earlier, expressive, and therefore enjoyable to the senses. And it is best when it is deep and true. Art impinges upon our senses, as we just experienced through the music. And because it is enjoyable, there is also an inclination to tolerate shallow, superficial, seductive, and even fake art. It just entertains us for the moment. But art is life. Art is part of life. It's kind of the idea behind a sphere, the artistic sphere. It's present in all of existence. Like so many other things, it can teach us to be satisfied with shallowness, superficiality, and inauthentic acting. I am a Californian, a restless, very inauthentic, rootless, superficial species of human being. Brought up in the shadow of Hollywood and Disneyland, and taught that acting and fabricating things is as normal as constructing Frontierland, Adventureland, Fantasyland, Tomorrowland in Disneyland. All as easy as pretending you are a princess or a prince or a millionaire. My default setting is not to take anything seriously, to always be impatient, superficial, flippant, counting nothing as profound, nothing as sacred. What does the Kuyperian neo-Calvinist Christianity have to offer to such a person? Two things. The heart and a unity-loving emphasis on the diversity of creation spheres. Its unique emphasis upon life as a whole, as coram Deo, life before God, sensing somehow, yes, God is with us, near us, cares about us. This unique emphasis upon life as a whole is something very special. It assumes that a person's or a community's or a persuasion's basic orientation issues from the heart and not merely emotions or the mind. A comprehensive approach to all of life distinguishes it from a reductionist, intellectualistic, or merely theological position. At least that's how I take that tradition, this tradition. Kuyper, following Calvin, had this gritty way of engaging the whole, the fullness of life in all of its different facets and areas and spheres, from out of a unified orientation to God, to Christ, creation, fall, redemption, antithesis, common grace. These two things, the heart and unity-loving emphasis on the diversity of creation, mark, or should mark, this kind of Christianity. And it's kind of interesting that in this little book, and I highly recommend it, Wisdom and Wonder, it's a collection that was sort of drawn out of 3 volumes that he wrote on what's called Common Grace. So Abraham Kuyper, Wisdom and Wonder. He describes evil, and it's very interesting because you see in his description of evil this same idea, which I call the unity-loving emphasis on diversity. And yet he says, so the actual darkening of sin, he says, lies in this, that we lost the gift of grasping the true context, the proper coherence, the systematic integration of all things. Now we view everything only externally, not in the core of its essence, each thing individually, and not in their mutual connection or coherence and in their and in their origin from God. The connection that coherence of things that is their original connection with God. And this, he says, can be sensed by what he calls the Spirit, us as spiritual creatures. Think now back for a moment on the one who got me into all this business, Kuyper and all that, and that's Hans Rockmacher. Art in the life and death of a culture. Civilizations and cultures can die, and many have really died. So Hans Rockmacher's 1970 Modern Art and the Death of a Culture, if nothing else and not completely correct, left no doubt about the significance of art. And by that, I think he inspired a lot of artists. I know some of them. And you probably do too. Art can play a role either in keeping a culture alive or helping usher it into its death. Very interesting writer, sociologist, Philip Reif from the University of Pennsylvania, although I believe he has died, wrote a book in 1967 in which he talks about something which he calls death works. Things such as Andres Serrano's Piss Christ. They tear at the fabric of culture, shaming its core convictions and values. I think there are such things as death works, but there's also the opposite. Art that is true, by contrast, can build up a culture. It can do so because as something public, imaginative, and expressive, it can move us deeply in the heart. However, discovering and expressing truth is hard. The truth is often hidden beyond and below the surface of what is apparent, which means we must hear and see both sides of a story, including apparent contradictory evidence and testimony, before truth can come out. The same is true with art, making art and receiving art. We've heard a little bit about some portions of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, tries to train us to see deeper, to discern truth from false, true from false, superficial obedience to the law from true obedience, to move us from Pharisaical legalism to discerning obedience of the heart and conscience. When the message of the gospel is spread throughout a society or culture in word, deed, and illustrated in music and art, secondary fruits, Rockmacher used to say, may appear in the form of more biblical ideas, more biblical attitudes towards work, towards money, towards the natural world, and towards life as a whole. Music and art are able to help because they bombard our eyes and assail our ears. We've had that today. In a wonderful way, assail our ears in powerful ways through vibrations and images which reach deep into us and lodge in our person, lodge in our memories, lodge in our beating, willing, gullible heart. Again, the Sermon on the Mount prepares us for complicated circumstances such as these, and such as were faced by Hamlet, Hamlet, Luther, Bonhoeffer, Paul, Jesus himself, when the world is so upside down that being an innocent reader, a good daughter or son, a law-abiding citizen involves us in evil and contributing to it. So the Sermon on the Mount exercises us in finding a path of obedience or paths of obedience that are not superficial, not Pharisaic, but have a truth in them that goes beyond that and is a hard thing to find. How do you live as a Bonhoeffer? How do you live as a Luther in a church which has gotten corrupt? How do you live as a Hamlet when your father has been murdered by your uncle and married your mother and your mother doesn't realize it? Just think of that scene when Hamlet goes in and confronts his mother, piercing her to the heart because he just tells her what she's done. How do you live in these situations? Today there is much talk about the brain, but not much about memory, except when it comes to dementia. In Book 10 of the Confessions, Augustine writes all about memory. He wasn't a Californian. Great, he says, is the power power of memory, an awe-inspiring mystery. My God, a power profound and infinite multiplicity. And this, he says, I am myself. What is this power, this awe-inspiring mystery, and what is the significance for art? Memory involves time, human awareness, consciousness, history, and images we form and which are formed in us by works of writers, artists, musicians. And since art deals in stories, kind of world projection, sometimes you hear or you see some artwork and it's like taking you into this world for a moment. It brings together those three facets of almost all existence, and partly that's why it's so powerful. Beginning, middle, and an end. So it captures something that's divided up in time, but put into one thing. And this is a lot of what is involved in memory. Memory is said to be an infinite multiplicity, probably because it mixes so many levels of human activity. That is, trying to understand past feelings, that's what Augustine's doing in the Confessions a lot, re-examining thoughts, deeds, what we've done, motives, and our reaction to these in the past, with the voice of conscience there somewhere, speaking in the background, Conscience is sometimes called 1,000 witnesses. Would there be any experience at all without memory? Conscience? The potential significance of art is directly related to the kind of creature we are. So let us approach this topic of art by asking or examining the question, what is conscience? Where does it come from? How does it relate to this thing called heart? To do this, something first needs to be said about the biblical terms lev and cordia, in English heart. The deepest, most profound biblical mystery, I think, about human beings is the pumping, willing, believing human heart. The attitude behind all attitudes, the intent behind all intents, the intent behind all of life. It truly has a mind of its own, this conscience, and it is we, but it needs a lot of help in keeping. Remember the proverb that talks about keep your heart. Loving God with all your heart is not easy. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Moreover, conscience is kind of buried in the heart, or it's part of the heart, and it speaks as if it was an external voice. That is, when we listen to it, which maybe we don't very often. Okay, what is conscience? This is going to be the end and the hardest part. I'm going to tell you what conscience, well, this is a quote, and I'll tell you later who it's from. So God has made us hearted, sensuous, participating, thinking beings, capable of perceiving what is present, reflecting on or looking back on what is past. In particular, we are capable of perceiving whatever passes in our hearts or lives, of knowing whatsoever we feel or do, and that either while it passes or while it is past. This we mean when we say man is a conscious being. Humanity, humans, are conscious beings. He hath a consciousness or inward perception, both of things present and things past, relating to himself, herself, his own tempers, outward behavior. But what we usually term conscience is somewhat more than just consciousness. But conscience seems to start with consciousness. It is not barely the knowledge of our present or remembrance of our previous life. To remember, to bear witness either of the past or the present things is only one and maybe the least office of conscience. Its main business is to accuse and excuse, to approve and disapprove, to acquit and condemn, sometimes called the moral sense. I think that conscience is not much talked about these days. I cannot remember hearing a sermon about it. I cannot remember being exhorted by someone to try to have a clear conscience, to listen to your conscience. People used to say, listen to your conscience when you're making decisions. Did the conscience completely disappear? Or is it that we feel so guilty just living in the modern age and participating in the situation that we live in, our materialism, the way sexuality is thrown at us and goes into us, and all of the ways in which we acquiesce to sin? Who would want to listen to their conscience? Art is tactile. The heart is tactile. And conscience advises the heart. Art can touch us so deeply and is so important. It can move us in the right ways. It can wake us. It challenges us often. We see something, we may not even like it, or we like it, or it makes us think, or it makes us wonder. Also, as we talked about music, it can penetrate us so deeply. And I, as a kind of child of the 60s, So in 1967, I lived in the area of San Francisco, and the exuberance of the whole counterculture exploded. And I gotta say, I thought it was wonderful. All that music, the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane and Jimi Hendrix, and it just goes on and on. And we saw them all. Man, the way you heard one song and you were converted. I don't know what you could say the conversion was to, but you knew you wanted to be hip. And you knew that was something, that was a thing, and you wanted to go with it. Just one song? Or seeing some people in the street dressed in a very artistic way that you with the beads and everything else. You wanted to be like that. Those are elements, or those are examples of the power of art, the power of music, the power of culture, of beliefs, of understandings, put into form that is tangible. And that's kind of the mystery and the strength, the power of art. Now, I think my time is up. But what I'd really like to do is give you a little sermon now on Paul and the 26 places, Peter as well, in the New Testament that talk about conscience and about the importance of a clear conscience and living that way, trying to live that way. And maybe your arts could also bloom and blossom out of this clear conscience that's open before the living God to love and serve him. One last thing, an advertisement. This is for a talk given by, I think is very, very worthwhile, by Timothy Keller. You can find it on YouTube. It's called Preaching to the Heart. He gives 6 elements there that he advises to teach us how to preach to the arts. And the last thing I'll just say about that is that many of those have to do with the tangible, the ways in which we are, tangible, feeling, sensing beings, and how those examples of biblical ideas and biblical teaching put into those kind of very tactile examples can penetrate the heart. Anyway, it's very worthwhile preaching to the heart. Thank you very much.
Up there, and I hope that you've all got your questions ready. I'm going to invite our panelists up now. So, Fr Dominic, Murray, if you would come up. I don't think Henk has arrived yet, has he? I don't think so. So, get your questions ready for Roger. After that, I will pose a few questions to the panel and invite you to add your questions.
Okay, so thank you again to Roger and to Fr Dominic for your talks. They were just fascinating. And I'm sure that there are many questions from the audience. We're becoming aware, and I think phenomenology has really showed us this, that the arts are not merely a matter of creating objects that carry beauty in this objective, passive way. That we find that we are addressed by art in a similar way that we find that we are addressed by the world. When I was speaking about wonderment earlier, that there's something that we become responsible to once we have encountered art and once we've encountered the world. And so it becomes really important how we pay attention and what we pay attention to, especially in the age that we live in. We're bombarded by images, and our artists compete with all manner of entertainment. Visual artists are now forced to compete on Instagram with their images, with clickbait, with news, fake and not so fake, with videos, noise, footage of war, footage of cats, all without any change in context. It just flicks past your eyes. And so I think it's really important for us to, and in so doing, visual arts are robbed of their materiality. And this is something that I'm very aware of working with artware, is that we're showing these images, but we've taken them out of their original context. We've taken out the practice that surrounds experiencing an image, often what is meant to be a communal practice and a practice that's situated within a liturgical setting. Now we see it in this context, this environment. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about what are specific forms of art and what the individual artworks do and are and what makes a good artwork. But there's a lot of work to do around the practices surrounding how we encounter art and how we encounter it together and how we shape our sense of ourselves, not merely as isolated individuals. In our art session this morning, we had the privilege of spending some time with Murray Watts, and Murray put his finger on something very important which many artists face today, which is that he said that they are either this short or they're that tall. In other words, you're either great and you are almost admired by the masses, or you are totally irrelevant and heard and seen by no one. But it really, we are caught in this situation where the artist is the epitome of the expressive individualist, but there aren't many other models out there of what an artist can be. And this is something that needs to be recaptured for us, is how can we be mere artists? And I think there's a sense in which the artist has to die in order for the artist to live. But I wonder, Murray, if you could speak to us maybe a little bit about how artists can find their way through this situation where there's so much pressure to be great, and if you aren't, you basically fall completely through the cracks.
It's a dilemma for artists because naturally the nature of art is individual expression very often, and it is something unique that you have to give. The iris, the DNA, the fingerprint, we're all unique, we're a different expression of the image of God. We have so much that we've been given and so much to give. The difficulty is, and I've said this in the art session this morning, the arts little moment that we had this morning, is that the trouble is, particularly because I move and breathe in the world of theatre and film, so I'm working with actors a lot, is this problem that people feel 100 foot tall or 1 inch tall, according to the fortunes that they're going through. And one of the things I do at Freswick Castle in the far north of Scotland, where I live, and I have the Wayfarer Trust, and I have a lot of arts and media people coming from all over the world for encouragement and inspiration. I'll take people out under the stars because the night sky is unbelievable. There's no light pollution. And in a way, what we're talking about culturally is a kind of light pollution. We can't see our place in the universe, and it's as if people start to find their right height under heaven. We belong, we have a place, God made us. You're no more important, and you're no less important than anyone else, but you need to find the right height and the right fit. So we need to take our uniqueness and our expressiveness, but not allow it to become absorbed into the cultic religion of expressive individualism, which is the worship of the West. It's not about that. It's about harmony. And I read a passage from Ingmar Bergman about the building of Chartres Cathedral and how everybody was anonymous and nobody was an ego. And nobody is remembered. We don't know who did it. And yet everybody was combining their art with their worship. So I think worship, André Gide said, without worship you shrink. And that's what can make you very small. Or if you're worshipped yourself, it can make you too large. And I think the secret is in a lot of what Craig has been saying about community. And it's fantastic that we've been urged to think about community so much. And I think the answer to this question, Otto, is that artists need to find community that's not necessarily, obviously, there in the church. It's more like collections of sympathetic people, alliances, people of different disciplines, maybe in the financial world or in the world of education. but if you like, a family and a fellowship of friends with whom they can retain their sanity and find their right place. But I think this thing of collaborations and community is the key. And one thing I referenced today was about William Wilberforce and the Clapham sect and the abolition of slavery campaign at the beginning of the 19th century, the end of the 18th century. Bankers, playwrights, politicians, clergy, people of all disciplines, but a small group, maybe a dozen people, changed the face of Britain. And I long for that again, and I long for artists, poets and playwrights were part of that. So I long for that sense of constructive community.
Thank you, Murray. I think one of the wonderful things about art is it puts us in touch with these universal things, with these transcendent things. We feel like we are communing with something timeless, but at the same time, it never lets us get too high up in the air because it's so specific. And each work of art, it's so situated. Good art is always very situated and tactile and contextual. And I wonder if maybe Murray, you could talk to us about the specific gift of theatre for our time, what that offers us.
Thanks, Dominic. One thing I want to say about theatre is it's essentially a dissident art form, and it will often be countercultural, and it will often talk extremely honestly and painfully about unbearable truths in the domestic world or the political world or society. You only have to think about Ibsen's play Ghosts, the end of the 19th century, or Long Day's Journey into Night by Eugene O'Neill, or many contemporary plays. And I wrote an article many years ago about why the footsteps of Christ might be seen more clearly through many 20th century theatres than through many 20th century churches. And that's an irony, because most of the playwrights I'm talking about were not believers or were even hostile to the church and religion. But there's a searing honesty about the best theatre. And this is what we long to see as Christians in the churches, is an openness and an honesty. And I appreciated your honesty about the difficulty of the artist, Father Dominic, of getting your work out there. And because you're speaking so honestly about that dilemma, that cuts through and makes us realise how important it is to respond to that as a community. What worries me about many churches, and I've been involved with many different traditions and in many places, including different countries, is how hard it is to be honest in a Christian context, because the pressure, this is going back to Roger's point about everyone's a performer, and the danger is you go into church and you have to put a mask on, and that mask is sweet and kind and friendly. I can remember a clergyman in York telling a great friend of mine who was the precentor there what he was going to do when he was going to retire. And the precentor said, "Where are you going to go?" And he said, "I'm going to find myself a deeply unfriendly church to go to." And this made me laugh a lot, because I knew exactly what he meant. That at some level, the friendliness and the welcome and the kind of facade is very difficult. And sometimes you want to just sit in the shadows and get real with God. But even better, to be in an environment where you're free to be honest. And when Craig spoke yesterday about the realities in the world and Gaza and so on, it's a searing kind of honesty. That's why that was music to my ears, because like the rest of us, we're just struggling, we're in agony about these things. The theatre is one of the primary mediums for dealing with this sort of pain. And also, it's hard to shut it down. So that's why Athol Fugard, I had the good fortune to meet, and many other playwrights and people in South Africa years ago, why his plays could be done virtually underground at times, and it's true in what was then the Iron Curtain, that plays, maybe this is a thought about the future, as it becomes more difficult to get our art out there and to get films made, more and more theatre, more and more stuff going on in churches and homes and schools and so on. We need this honesty. And I think this is something that is worth supporting as well, to make it happen.
Now, I was briefly speaking to Fr Dominic about this before the session, that with the rise of the idol, of the pop star, I think the voice of the people has often been, people don't think of themselves as singing beings anymore. I at least grew up not in, that communal singing was something that was really underplayed. And yes, I was also struck by what you said about your frustration with these spiritual songs that have been removed from a worship context. That people are really deprived then of participation in the act of worship. And I wonder if you could speak to us about the gift of singing together and how we might facilitate singing together and what that might mean for us.
Thank you very much, Otto. Would you like me to stand? Does everybody hear me at the back? Great stuff. Thank you. Where I'm going to start in this to answer this question, I think it's something that illustrates the importance of singing and music, that people often have very strong and contradictory views on it in the church. For example, a choir that some people find uplifting and others feel has silenced them and their singing and their worship of God. A couple of years ago, Margaret Beaufort Institute of Theology here in Cambridge, where I work, asked me to teach a course on liturgical participation. And I gave people two images. Imagine worship where everybody is doing something. It might be singing or playing an instrument or reading or dancing or carrying up gifts or welcoming people at the door. It's a buzz. Another service where maybe Byzantine liturgy, which you find both in the Orthodox and Catholic churches, where apparently the choir and clergy are doing everything. And there is this sense of rapt attention on the part of the people that you often get in an audience in the theatre. Or are some people actually completely baffled by it all, or even distracted by something else? So I asked them this question, and they said, well, yeah, you could have it where everybody's doing something, but actually they're just going through the motions. They don't really believe it all. Or on the other hand, where people are completely rapt attention, taken up the ascension experience by what they see. Or again, they're completely mystified and lost, and the clergy and singing and going on. Or others who are actually loving it, that everybody's singing the same song. So I think in this, we need body and soul. Some of the best liturgies I've attended have actually catered for those who can sing and those actually who can't sing. I mean, those who love music but can't sing might actually quite like it that somebody's doing the singing for them. But I think maybe, again, it's those different gifts. Maybe the contemplatives. My mum loves music at church. She doesn't sing much, but she's very much a contemplative. She's taken up in it. I need to sing. I'd be very frustrated if I couldn't. So maybe a way to find an answer is actually to look around us and say, well, who has God called together today? And how do we, in our liturgy, include those different ways of participation? I don't know, is that a fair answer?
Well, I mean, there's so much there to respond to, and so I just want to give you now an opportunity to pose any questions to any of our panelists.
Why is it that Africans can sing as they work and harmonise and generate a tremendous sense of communal excitement in grim context? Why is it that farmers in this country used to sing as they were building the hayrick. Why is it now that actually so many groaners in churches, why can't we harmonise with each other naturally? Why do we need music?
I'd say one thing. I mean, it's obvious a lot of the things we're talking about do have to do with the technological societies we live in. I mean, they just can't get away from that. You really have to think back to when there was no way you could make music unless you made it, or your neighbor, or your kids. I mean, that's just, well, let me just turn this on, I got some music for you, right? And it's endless, right? So, I mean, that's only part of an answer, but it is part of, I mean, the technological society and all the ways that it changes the art. One last thing I would add to that is, you know, my brother family, some of my family lived in Southern California. I live in Northern California. We don't like Southern California, right? When you go there, you're always on camera, right? Their makeup, everybody, and it really is true. You look around at the people. Well, actually, now that's come to Northern California too, because we have cell phones and we can take pictures of each other all the time. So you're never just you. And it's never enough for just you to sing. Why would we do that when we could turn this on and see the world's greatest stars? So a lot of academics have said that too. I'm going to be teaching this class. They know they can find somebody who's so much more handsome and interesting and, you know, sexy or whatever. So I don't know. That isn't really much of an answer, but it is part of the answer. How do you answer that? Well, that's a big one. Ask Oliver Donovan tomorrow.
Yes, I mean, the Industrial Revolution, I suppose, killed a lot of this. I mean, a lot of the folk songs collected by people like Ray Vaughan Williams and Gustav Holst, they knew they had to do it or they would just vanish. I mean, something we've tried to do in the Catholic Church, there was a huge, when the new liturgy was introduced in the vernacular, not just Latin, the end of the 60s, there was a huge outpouring of creativity. Think of the St. Louis Jesuits, for example, a lot of their songs. But there's been a feeling now that we need to get back a basic repertoire for our people. So even basic responses, according to plain chant, the Lord be with you, and with your spirit. And it's very slow work, but it is actually happening. People are getting it, those three notes, week by week. It's going in. I wonder if that is a way forward. I hope we could do something a bit more exciting with time.
And it may not be a very sensible question, but I'm fascinated by the possibility, just the possibility, that art can be imitated by artificial intelligence. And the question is, can artificial intelligence actually produce a Rembrandt or one of these great artists from the past in such a way that the average person cannot distinguish between what was the original and what is the imitation? Or is it quite impossible for artificial intelligence to do such a thing? And is one reason why artificial intelligence can never be the same as human beings?
So I had originally titled my talk Deep Fake or Fake Deep. And what I meant by that was, deep fake just depends upon syntax. It has nothing to do with semantics, so it has nothing really to do with meaning. It's just a machine which is taught to draw connections between morphemes, between letters almost. It is very impressive. I mean, when a friend of mine sent something I wrote through through GPT chat and sent it back to me, I said, "This is brilliant! This is brilliant!" And then I read it a second time, and I thought, "No, this is just like a paper you get from a first-year student who's kind of put everything together, but they don't have a clue what they're saying. They have no idea." So I think that's what I wanted to say in my little talk, that intentionality and the heart and being a person and feeling pain, your computer will never feel pain. It could pretend to feel pain, but circuits don't have that. It will never feel exalted. So the degree to which they can fake is very high, but it's never really deep. I don't think they can ever get really deep. I think because of the fact it's always just associational And that really is a mystery. What it is to be a hearted human being who can both function on a superficial level, but at a deeper level, there's an intentionality. I'm trying to do this. Maybe I'm not even being honest about it. Like the difference somebody talked about today between real needs, perceived needs, and real needs. You go to the ghetto in California where I live, and the guys have very, very strong perceived needs. I need a Cadillac, and I need a lot of money, and I need... Well, you know what? That isn't what he needs. That's a perceived need. What's his real need? He wants to be respected. He wants people to honor him. He wants the girls to look at him. He doesn't care about that Cadillac and all the show, really. So anyway, I don't, a machine will, I think, never get to that level of intention because it can't. It can only kind of fake it, do it as well as the people who are really gifted programmers. But yes, man, on the surface, it is impressive.
Thank you. Actually, we had a seminar at Margaret Beaufort on this, just a webinar just last week between us and the Yuan Dao Studies Society of Hong Kong, which is an ecumenical theological society. We got, one of our speakers was Gareth Polmere. He's a fellow at Margaret Beaufort, a lecturer at the Royal College of Art in London. And he showed us an artwork he'd created using AI. To cut a long story short, he said the difference is AI didn't make this art, I used AI. So he had agency. So it isn't fake art. It's a bit like maybe using an electric drill rather than a hand one. So he thinks it's got potential, but it can't replace human inspiration and consciousness.
Thanks for raising the point, Andrew. It's really the biggest issue of the time. And I agree very much with the other two about the fact that we shouldn't be worried too much about the art, visual art at the present moment. But according to Mohammed Suleiman, the coming wave, one of the big shots in the AI world for Google, and he is warning of things like in 3 or 4 years' time, you could have somebody in a garage somewhere developing through biopathology a pathogen that could kill 1 billion people. So there are very, very sobering things about what's happening at the moment with AI. And I think as a Christian community, we really need to take it very seriously. And one of the very small gestures that we do at Freswick Castle, I ask people not to use their mobile phones beside the fires or at the meal times, because it's sacramental togetherness. And it's very difficult, and the Silver Surfers are among the worst at actually being able to keep to this. It's not just the 18, 19-year-olds who come, or my grandchildren. When I asked my granddaughter, who's 9, what she wants to be, she didn't say doctor or astronaut, she said a social influencer. Right. That's the scale of the problem. But it is something that we really need to address, and I think it emphasizes, going back to Craig's point about community, we need more and more cell groups of face-to-face communication. We need a very humble kind of rebellion against the overwhelming force of technology. So we need, just like the early Christians in the catacombs, we need to see little red spots all over the UK and Europe and the United States and around the world where people are meeting in person, playing music, making things. In my book, Yours Truly, I imagine a world, in one of the stories in that, what happens when the electricity dies? What happens when the plastic doesn't come out of the ATM, when there's no money? And gradually, as everything dies out, you realize what's left. The small bands of survivors in ruined villages who were able only to dance and sing and harmonize and paint in daubing clay on cave walls, and that all the electronic stuff and the films and the CDs, it's all gone. But what they have recovered is joy. and hope. And so this is a massive subject, and I'm glad you've raised it, because I think no conference like this should avoid it, even if we've just pegged it as an issue. Because I think we're only at the beginning of what is such a transformation that is far, far bigger. And I notice among many very wise and intelligent people, there's still a tendency to say things like, well, we had the Industrial Revolution, or we had the printing press, we got through that. This is totally different. Honestly, the level of difference you cannot possibly exaggerate. And as artists, I think we have a contribution. And it's something about the making and the singing and the beauty of what we've experienced with Rachel playing. We need to recover hope. We need to recover our souls, our community. And that's what AI cannot do. It will never have a soul. And go back to the hearted person is a brilliant discussion.
My question is, in the context of community and participation and this innate ability that we have to, speak to the cosmos and speak to God, do you think artists have a responsibility to encourage people to join in that conversation? And if they do, what could be done?
I think that conversation does very much need to happen. I think you put your finger on something there. I don't think artists tend to be very good at that. It's not because of a failing on their part, but artist's job, the poietes, the person who makes things. Jacques Maritain said, who was married to a poet, said that the artist is the intellectual who makes or does things. But that rather suggests that he or she doesn't talk much. What I think you're bringing up is the need for the reintegration of the artist. In the Irish Golden Age of the 7th or 8th century, the artist's job was to speak the truth to the king. So he or she was a senior civil servant. In the Middle Ages, the artist was an artisan, a skilled craftsperson. In the sort of 18th, 19th century, they become the tortured romantic because they haven't got a place in society anymore. So maybe, our sister Rose, some of you know, Dominican sister, young Dominican sister, she once said an interesting thing to me about Rowan Williams' book, Faith in the Public Square. There was this great conversation in the 90s, Rowan Williams, Rabbi Sachs, great people like that. She said, that's over. There is no more public square. It's not faith in the public square anymore. It's faith providing the public square. And I think with our different gifts in the church, those who are pastors, encouragers, administrators, they can get the artists into the conversation and then open that up with others. So I think you're onto something really good there.
Just a couple of things I'd add to that. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs actually said a wonderful thing. He said, what we need in the world today are ecologies of hope. We need to create environments in which hope is likely to flourish. And this is where artists combining and encouraging people and one another, and I think you're absolutely right about the fact that artists are not that good very often in reaching out. But we need to do this as regards the future. I think we need to see, I think the patron saint here is St. Barnabas. It was his feast day the other day. None of us would be here today if it wasn't for Barnabas. It's not because of Paul or Peter that we're here. It's indirectly, of course, but it's Barnabas who championed the great son of encouragement, who believed in Paul and presented him to the skeptical disciples and went on the first missionary journey. And Barnabas is the encourager. And I think all of us here are encouraged, by what the Kirby Lang Centre is doing, because these are the initiatives that create ecologies of hope. And hope is beginning to grow, hope in our hearts today, but also through the work and the conversations. And this is where, I'm thinking of my uncle, who was a missionary in China, who knew Eric Liddell and Gladys Aylward very well. He was a close friend of Watchman Nee. He had to leave China under gunfire and bombardment from the invading Japanese. His mission station was being destroyed. And when I wrote his obituary for the Independent newspaper, I quoted the fact that he was planting seeds in a Qiangqiao garden under gunfire. He would never see those flowers grow, but he said, somehow I felt a strong hope. And then he lived long enough to have leaders of Chinese churches come and visit him in his 90s, and he realized that despite all the terrors of the decades that followed, extraordinary plants had grown. And this is what I mean by the ecology of hope. Some of us may feel that we're actually planting seeds under gunfire at the moment, but we must plant that. And as artists, I have felt, you put your finger on a big thing for me here, Aaron, because I have felt that as well as being a playwright, I needed to be a violist, so I needed to be one of those ecology of hope people. And I hope that there would be many here who would have the same feeling as I have.
Well, thank you so much to all three of you, and thank you for all your questions. Can we give a hand